Hey guys, it's Jo and welcome back to Trauma Talk. Purity culture. Have you ever heard this term before? I grew up knowing exactly what this is about, but I know many of you maybe haven't or weren't raised in the conservative Christian church, so let me explain this and then I will explain how it relates to trauma. Purity culture is this idea that I believe is an incredibly destructive one, that the most important thing basically in the entire world is that you remain a virgin until you're married. Maybe only second to devoting your life to God, but being a virgin is like the number one thing that matters. And secondly, you cannot be enticing to men. There's this idea that basically men can't control themselves. They're such sexual beings that basically that they can't control their thoughts or their actions. And so you have to dress modestly, appropriately. You don't want to cause them to sin or lead them into temptation, which leads into rape culture like you wouldn't believe and leads into blaming women when crimes happen against them to an insane extent. And also, in purity culture, abstinence is the only option. There's no other option that's taught, and there's no sex education whatsoever. And so if you are getting married, and getting married young is often the best option or the promoted option because you're supposed to get married and have kids because that's your role as a woman in the conservative Christian biblical purity culture terms, then you'll be coming into that relationship of marriage, generally speaking, having at most maybe kissed. Some people consider that too far or dirty or wrong, but maybe held hands. So the extreme would be going from like maybe having held hands with your soon-to-be husband to getting married and being expected to have a full and complete sexual relationship with him. And the idea that is taught is that when you're married, suddenly everything is going to be perfect and is going to click, and you guys are going to be perfectly sexually attracted to each other, having no sexual contact of any sort before that. I mean, even like making out or kissing or anything, no contact before that, and you'll be perfectly fine, essentially, going from nothing to everything on your wedding night. And that in itself can be an extremely frightening and traumatic experience for women and for people. And I'm guessing maybe for men too. I've never talked about that side of the equation or heard it, but that's just not the reality of the situation. And there's so much shame and so much guilt that is related to anything sexual. If you have a sexual thought, you have to repent of it. If you have a sexual desire, like that's wrong and horrible, and you should feel bad about it. And those feelings of shame and guilt don't just disappear the moment you're married, and it's okay in God's eyes and everyone's eyes to have a sexual relationship. Maybe for some people they do, but for most people they don't. For most people that causes real issues in a relationship, and the complete lack of education is a real problem. Not being able to name sexual anatomical body parts, not being able to name sexual acts, being completely unable to communicate what you want, what you like, what you don't want, what you don't like, leads to huge problems in a relationship, in a sexual relationship, in a marriage. And the idea that your virginity is somehow linked to your worth is beyond damaging. I have heard so many people use the words damaged goods when referring to themselves. If they chose to have sex before they were married, or if they didn't choose to have sex before they were married and it was taken from them if they were sexually assaulted or sexually abused. And I hate this term more than I can tell you because it breaks my heart, because no one is damaged goods. Whether this was a choice you made or this was a choice that someone took away from you, and your virginity is not tied to your worth, whether you're male or female. And if you give it to someone or if it's taken, how you feel about that, you need to deal with those feelings, of course, but it doesn't change your value regardless. And there's this idea in purity culture that somehow it changes your worth. It changes your worth when you get married, that maybe someone will take you because you're damaged, or maybe someone will take you or God will forgive you. And that's just horrible. Life is so much more than that. Most people don't care about that. If you end up in an abusive relationship like I did, the amount of shame and guilt that I felt from everything that happened, on top of the normal amount of shame and guilt that's felt when you're abused was just amplified, because this person who was a pastor in the Christian church, and I'm sure was fully aware of exactly how to manipulate everything that I was raised in and I knew, fed off of that. So as he was abusing me, as I was doing things I did not want to do, as he was doing things to me I did not want him to do, and made that clear, I felt like it was all my fault. I felt like I was enticing him, I was doing something wrong, I was leading him into sin, it was just poor him and horrible me, and everything was my fault. Even more so, even more than we all normally do when we're being abused. And setting people up to feel that way, creating a culture where that's the natural reaction, is just not good. And teaching your kids that the only possible option is abstinence only until marriage, and then not teaching, like deciding as a church and a culture that we cannot talk about sex because sex is bad and dirty and wrong, except in marriage, and then not providing any education on that is actually damaging. It's not just a lack of education, it causes real problems. I've always felt like I was years behind people my age when it came to anything sexually related, because I couldn't put things into words. I would still like turn pink when talking about anything sex related, you know, sometimes even up until now, and especially up until a couple years ago. And thankfully I'm in a relationship with someone who is incredibly understanding and who is awesome and great, and we've worked through so much together, but not everybody has that. When you don't have education, a lot of people end up in relationships with people who don't understand, who expect them to be completely on board with everything sexual, because that's what the Christian men have been taught in the church, that as soon as they get married, they're gonna have wives who are completely on board for everything and, you know, super sexual and super into everything because they have been storing up all their sexual energy for years, essentially, when again, that's just not the reality of the situation. And so I could probably go on about this for a very long time, but I don't want to bore you all. Basically, I wanted to convey the message to you that if you have been a part of purity culture, if you've grown up in the conservative Christian church and received these messages that you have less value if you are not a virgin, or if you have done things, or if you've done things before you're married, that is not true. That is a flat out lie. That is ridiculous for anyone to ever say to you, and if they said that, they are wrong. If someone took something from you, if you were in a relationship or someone did something to you, that is their fault. That is not yours. You did not lose worth. And if you willingly gave something to someone, if you gave your virginity to someone, that's okay. That's all right. That doesn't make you a bad person in any way, shape, or form. If you feel like that is something, you know, that you regret and is between you and God, then, you know, work it out between you and God, but he doesn't think anything less of you either. And I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that I really do think that this purity culture narrative really damages people, really damages young people, young women, I'm sure young men as well, though I'm not as familiar with that side of the conversation, and feeds into rape culture, feeds into staying in abusive relationships, feeds into a lot of really negative things, and sets people up for years and years of shame and guilt that is so difficult to break. And so if you're listening to this and you are teaching purity culture, I would just encourage you maybe to reconsider what you're doing and how you're teaching it. And that's what I had to say today. Sorry for the bit of a rant. This is something I really do feel very strongly about because I disagree with it on so many levels. I don't think it's wrong to wait until you're married to have sex. Absolutely, if that's what you want to do it. I think that's a great choice for you to make. If you don't want to make that choice, then don't make that choice, and that's a great choice for you to make. But I think it should be a choice. I think people should have the education, should be able to communicate and say words and say what they like and what they don't like, and at least be able to use anatomically correct terms, and again, have the education to make choices and understand that they are a lot more than their virginity, and God doesn't hate them, and that it's not their fault if things happen to them. I am Jo Beckwith, and this is Trauma Talk. Thank you so much for listening. On this channel, we talk about life after trauma and things related to trauma, so I really appreciate you listening. Please subscribe before you go. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.